They say truth dies in silence. But sometimes truth is buried alive. Beneath floorboards, beneath history, beneath the kind of shame no nation dares to name. And when it claws its way back up, it doesn't come alone. In the summer of 1903, a group of laborers working the foundation of an abandoned mansion in Clarksville, Tennessee, unearthed something they were never meant to see. 3 feet below the stone floor, wrapped in rotting oilcloth and sealed inside a rusted metal box, lay 47 photographs. Each one perfectly preserved. Each one a portrait of pain. But these weren't forensic records or investigative evidence. They were trophies, artifacts of control captured by a man who believed that domination was divine order, and that the suffering of others was his right to record. The mansion was called Ravenshollow Manor. Built before the Civil War, it loomed over the Cumberland River like a monument to arrogance. Its master, Cornelius Holloway, was a man of lineage, wealth, and reputation. To his neighbors, he was eccentric, a gentleman scholar, obsessed with early photography. To those who worked his land, he was something far worse. When the photographs were found, the men who uncovered them couldn't finish their work. Several fled the site entirely, swearing they'd seen faces that watched them through the glass plate's eyes that seemed aware of the century that had passed. The images weren't just violent, they were orchestrated, staged, as though someone had wanted the world to see. But here's where the story bleeds past history, because in one of those frames, partially obscured by the edge of a broken lens, there's a figure, a blurred reflection in the mirror behind the victims. A figure no one ever identified. And when those photographs were finally examined by modern historians decades later, they found something else. The composition of each frame perfectly mirrored a sequence found in one of Holloway's own early experiments, a private study titled The Ritual of Dominion. Every photograph of the murdered Holloway family had been taken according to that same ritual. The same angles, the same lighting, the same expressions of terror carefully preserved. The killer didn't just take revenge. He completed Cornelius Holloway's life's work. And somewhere in those 47 frames lies the proof that this was never just a murder. It was a message about power, how it corrupts, how it binds, and how it demands to be witnessed. Welcome to Ravenshollow, where history's ghosts never learned how to die. You weren't supposed to hear this story, but since you have, you'll never see a photograph the same way again. Before the blood, before the photographs, before the rot that crept through every wall of Ravenshollow Manor, there was pride. The Holloway family called it heritage. But what they really meant was dominion, an unbroken belief that power was proof of righteousness. Cornelius Holloway didn't inherit wealth. He inherited control, the kind that had been built on the backs of men who were never meant to rise. His father, Jeremiah, was a shrewd opportunist during the Civil War. When the Confederacy began to crumble, Jeremiah switched allegiance to the Union with surgical precision, ensuring the family's empire not only survived, but expanded. He learned one lesson: morality bends to whoever holds the whip. Cornelius absorbed that lesson early. He studied chemistry and optics at Vanderbilt before returning to the family estate with a new obsession: photography. To him, the camera wasn't just an invention. It was a weapon of immortality, a way to freeze people in moments of submission, to prove that even pain could be owned. At first, the town found it charming. The gentleman photographer of Clarksville, documenting the New South with academic curiosity. But those who worked his fields knew what he really captured. His studies of character were just portraits of humiliation: bent backs, scarred hands, eyes lowered. He called it visual anthropology. In truth, it was domination rendered in silver nitrate. Every photograph was a contract between his ego and their fear. And every time he developed an image in his basement darkroom, the fumes rose like incense in a private church of power. Cornelius's wife, Margaret, was a fragile creature numbed by laudanum, resigned to her husband's rituals. Their children were bred in that same atmosphere of silent cruelty. Edwin, the eldest, inherited his father's temper. Caroline, his cunning. Thomas, his doubt. The Holloway estate became a stage where cruelty was normalized and refined, an invisible institution of psychological control. The workers weren't chained anymore. They were bound by debt, fear, and the illusion of freedom. And in the center of it all stood Cornelius, his camera gleaming under lantern light, capturing the new order of post-war Tennessee. The kind of peace that's written in invisible ink, visible only to those who know where to look. But power has a frequency. When you amplify it too long, it begins to echo back. And at Ravenshollow, that echo was a man named Ezekiel Hayes, the foreman, the quiet one. The one who watched everything. The one Cornelius never realized could see the same way he did, through a lens. Because Ezekiel had a secret, and it would make him the only man in Tennessee capable of destroying the Holloway family from the inside using the very art Cornelius worshipped. Ezekiel Hayes was the kind of man the powerful never notice until it's too late. Quiet, efficient, invisible. He spoke with measured calm, carried himself with dignity, and listened far more than he ever spoke. To Cornelius Holloway, he was the ideal foreman, educated enough to keep the workers in line, obedient enough to never question the master's authority. But Cornelius misunderstood him. What he saw as obedience was observation. Ezekiel had been watching him for years, studying his methods, memorizing his patterns, and cataloging the rituals of control that governed life at Ravenshollow. Ezekiel had a secret gift. In his youth, he traveled with a wandering photographer who taught him the art of the camera. He understood its chemistry, its precision, its power. And when he saw Cornelius turn that same power into a weapon of humiliation, something began to burn quietly inside him, a slow, steady fire that would take years to reach its flashpoint. He kept his knowledge hidden. But in the solitude of night, when the manor slept, Ezekiel sometimes entered the abandoned smokehouse where he'd built his own crude darkroom. He salvaged scraps from Holloway's discarded experiments, broken lenses, cracked plates, half-used chemicals. There, in the dark, he began documenting the truth the Holloways refused to see. His photographs were not of dominance. They were of survival. The weathered hands of men who worked from dawn to dusk. The faces of women tending fires in the cabins. The quiet resilience of those who bore the Holloway name like a curse on their lips. To him, photography was resistance, evidence that their suffering was not invisible. Each image was a confession of the world as it really was. The same plantation economy, repackaged as progress. The same hierarchy dressed in new law. But something in Cornelius's eyes told Ezekiel his time was running out. The master had grown suspicious. He accused workers of conspiracy. He spoke of traitors among them. He began photographing beatings again, using his lens as a warning. And with every flash, the distance between the two men narrowed, one wielding the camera for domination, the other preparing to wield it for vengeance. The workers whispered that the manor was cursed, that the ghosts of the enslaved still lingered under the tobacco fields, that the land remembered, and perhaps it did, because late one night, as a storm rolled in from the Cumberland, Ezekiel stood beneath the windows of Ravenshollow Manor and made a silent promise to the dark. He would not just end Cornelius Holloway's reign. He would make him record his own fall. The night the storm came, the air over Clarksville felt thick-charged, like something waiting to happen. Lightning pulsed over the river in pale, unnatural flashes, and the fields around Ravenshollow hissed with the weight of rain. Inside the manor, the Holloways sat at dinner, their silverware clinking through the thunder. None of them noticed the smell of oil beneath the floorboards, or the faint creak of footsteps in the servant hall. Ezekiel Hayes had waited years for this night. Every act of humiliation, every lash, every command barked through clenched teeth. They had all led to this. But what made his revenge terrifying wasn't his rage, it was his clarity. This wasn't murder born of impulse. It was method, calculation, ritual. Cornelius Holloway had spent years constructing elaborate photographs of others' suffering. He believed composition revealed truth, that light could expose hierarchy itself. Ezekiel understood that belief better than anyone, and he would use it against him. Just after midnight, Cornelius was in his darkroom, his sanctum, developing his latest series of deterrent photographs. The storm knocked the lamps. The room flickered, and behind him, in that flicker, Ezekiel appeared. Cornelius turned, startled, but before he could shout, Ezekiel struck him not with brute force, but with command. "You taught me to capture truth," he said. "Now you'll record your own." When Cornelius awoke, his hands were bound. His camera stood before him, tripod steady, its aperture wide. Ezekiel had arranged the space like a set. The walls were lined with Cornelius's own photographs, workers in agony, their faces twisted in pain. And in the center of the room stood his family. Margaret, dazed from laudanum. Edwin, defiant. Caroline, trembling. Thomas, pale and silent. Ezekiel forced Cornelius to stand behind the lens. "You wanted to make history remember your power," he said softly. "Now, history will remember your sins." Cornelius protested, begged, threatened, but Ezekiel pressed the shutter. The first photograph was taken. The flash illuminated the room like lightning. In that brief, blinding moment, the Holloways saw something no human should see: the reflection of themselves, frozen in terror, captured by the man who once believed the world belonged to him. Ezekiel made him take another, and another. Each time, Cornelius obeyed. Each click of the camera was a confession, a ritual inversion of every cruelty he'd inflicted. Outside, thunder roared. Inside, vengeance was being developed in real time. By dawn, 5 bodies would lie in the parlor. And 47 photographs, each more deliberate than the last, would become the only evidence that the powerful can be made to see what they've done. When morning came to Ravenshollow, the storm had passed, but what it left behind wasn't silence. It was a kind of stillness that felt staged, as if the house itself were holding its breath. Neighbors claimed they saw smoke rising from the Holloway estate around dawn. By midday, the sheriff's men arrived to find the manor eerily intact. No fire, no sign of struggle, just a suffocating quiet and a smell sweet, chemical, like the ghost of developer fluid. Inside, the walls told the story. Every room was a gallery of consequence. The dining hall, overturned chairs, fine china shattered into constellations across the floor. The parlor, blood dried in elegant streaks along the molding, as if violence had tried to remain civilized. Upstairs, for bodies, positioned deliberately, hands clasped, eyes open, as if watching. Cornelius Holloway was not among them. His camera was. The officers found it on its tripod in the basement darkroom, perfectly centered. Inside the plate holder, a single undeveloped glass negative. Whoever had taken the photographs knew exactly what they were doing. No evidence. No fingerprints. Just intention. It was Thomas's body they found last, half submerged in the drained fountain out front. A camera lens had been placed over one of his eyes. That was the message. Vision as punishment. The coroner ruled it a case of extreme familial violence. Newspapers called it the Holloway tragedy. Within weeks, the story was buried, too macabre, too inconvenient, too close to exposing something the post-war South preferred to forget. But there was something the sheriff didn't report. In the attic, behind the boards of an old wardrobe, a small wooden crate lay sealed with pitch. Inside, 47 photographs, wrapped in oilcloth. They were never logged as evidence. No one knows who hid them, but local rumors said a deputy quit the force that week, claiming he'd seen the images and couldn't sleep. He spoke of faces in impossible places, reflections that shouldn't exist. He said one photograph showed Cornelius Holloway behind the camera, and also standing in the background of his own frame. The crate disappeared for 27 years. Ravenshollow was abandoned. Vines climbed its windows. The field hands who once labored there moved on or vanished. But the land doesn't forget. And in 1903, when the box was found again beneath the foundation, the images were as sharp as the day they were taken. Almost too sharp. Because light can preserve more than image, it can trap something. And what those photographs captured was never just revenge. It was consciousness. The year was 1903. The world had changed on the surface. The factories hummed, the trains cut through farmland like veins of steel, and men who once bowed their heads in the fields now worked under different masters in the cities. But Tennessee still carried its ghosts quietly, like bruises under clean clothes. When the Ravenshollow estate was finally sold to a development company, No one wanted to enter it alone. The foreman, a man named Arthur Sloane, joked that he didn't believe in curses. Only in bad architecture, he said. But even he felt something the moment they broke ground. They dug 3 feet under the eastern wall when one of the workers' shovels struck metal. A box, rusted, sealed tight, bound with wire. The foreman pried it open himself, thinking it might hold coins or old documents. Instead, it held 47 photographs, each preserved like a secret that refused to rot. At first, they thought it was art. But then someone turned one of the plates toward the light, and they saw. The first photograph showed a woman's face, eyes wide, mouth open but not screaming, just staring. Behind her, a figure held a blade, and in the corner of the frame, the faint outline of another man's reflection, unmistakably Cornelius Holloway's profile watching from behind the camera. The men dropped the photos. They swore the images shifted when touched, like the light inside them wasn't still. By sundown, half the crew had left the site. Sloane stayed behind. That night, he took the box home. Within a week, he was dead. Neighbors found him sitting upright in his chair, eyes glazed, face pale. On his lap was one of the photographs developed and framed. In the image, he was there, 2 standing among the Holloway family, one hand resting on Cornelius's shoulder. The box passed into evidence, then vanished again. Some said it was taken by collectors of occult material. Others whispered that it was confiscated by a federal agency that didn't exist on paper until decades later. But a few of those photographs resurfaced in private archives, and researchers began to notice something strange. Each print, when magnified, revealed small distortions, shadows where no source of light existed. Some contained faint, handwritten inscriptions in a mixture of Latin and an archaic African dialect. Vices est veritas. To see is to be bound. That phrase became a legend in Tennessee. Some said it referred to Cornelius's philosophy. Others said it was Ezekiel's curse. But there's another possibility, one that keeps scholars awake at night. What if those images didn't just record what happened at Ravenshollow? What if they're still recording? By the winter of 1931, the legend of Ravenshollow had become folklore, a southern ghost story whispered in bars and college dormitories. But in Nashville, within the archives of the Historical Society, a man named Dr. Abram Leland found something that would turn legend back into danger. He wasn't a believer. He was an empiricist, a man who trusted exposure times and chemical ratios, not curses. His obsession was historical photography, especially cases where early glass plates showed unexplained distortions. So when a private collector approached him with the Holloway box, Leland thought he'd found the holy grail of Reconstruction-era imagery. He opened it in his lab under red light, gloved hands trembling slightly, not from fear, but anticipation. The 47 glass plates were miraculously intact. The emulsions had crystallized in a way that defied decay. He set one on the light table, and that's when his skepticism began to erode. The images seemed to breathe. Under magnification, dust particles moved like living organisms. The shadows in the corners weren't static, they pulsed. The more he stared, the more the geometry of the room within each photo shifted, as though space itself was elastic. He documented his findings meticulously. Each plate he photographed produced anomalies, flickers that weren't visible to the naked eye but appeared in the negatives. The figures of the Holloway family grew clearer with every exposure, as if the act of observing was feeding them resolution. Within 3 weeks, Dr. Leland stopped sleeping. Colleagues reported him muttering phrases from the Latin inscriptions. Vices est veritas. To see is to be bound. His notes became erratic diagrams of eyes, spirals, and references to Ezekiel's sequence. When an assistant entered his lab one morning, the light table was on, a photograph displayed. Cornelius Holloway holding his own camera. Behind him something else. Not a man. A shape. Leland was nowhere to be found. All 47 plates were gone. But over the next decade, fragments began to appear again at estate sales, in museum basements, even one discovered in a safety deposit box in Chicago. Each one subtly different from the originals. The angles had changed. Sometimes the background contained modern objects, a clock, a lamp, even the outline of an electric light switch. It was as though the photographs were evolving. Pattern emerged. Every person who studied them vanished or went mad. Their last written words always the same. The frame is widening. By the 1950s, the photographs were quietly blacklisted. Museum registries erased them. Academic papers that cited them disappeared from archives. Someone or something was erasing the Holloway legacy from history itself. But you're hearing this now because one copy survived. One final image escaped destruction. And it shows something no historian can explain: an image that breaks time. The last surviving photograph surfaced in 1974, inside a condemned farmhouse near Knoxville. The discovery wasn't made by historians or collectors. It was found by a deputy investigating an unrelated disappearance. He found it framed, hanging crookedly above a rotting fireplace. The image inside was so clear, so vivid, that the deputy first assumed it was modern. But the print was made on 19th-century albumen paper, and its composition matched the missing 47th plate from the Holloway box. It was titled in faint pencil script along the bottom edge, Dominion, Clarksville. At first glance, it showed the parlor of Ravenshollow Manor. The family seated as before, Cornelius behind the camera, Margaret half hidden in shadow. But there was something off. The furniture was wrong, too modern. The wallpaper different. And in the far corner, reflected in a cracked mirror, the blurred outline of a fluorescent light. A light that didn't exist in 1876. The photograph had changed again. When experts examined it under infrared, they found layers, microemulsions overlapping like sediment. Each layer contained a different era. Gaslight, candlelight, electric light, neon. As though the image had continued recording long after its creation. What terrified the examiners most wasn't the anomaly of time, it was the detail. Behind the Holloway family sat rows of new figures, barely visible until magnified. Dozens of faces. Men, women, children. Not ghosts, observers. Some wore modern clothing, others military uniforms, others things that didn't match any period. Every one of them was looking directly into the lens. The image seemed to consume its viewers. Within days of analysis, the research team reported migraines, visual hallucinations, violent dreams. One described hearing a shutter click in her sleep. Another said he could feel his reflection turning toward him whenever he passed a mirror. When the institute's director attempted to destroy the photo, the negatives wouldn't burn. The chemicals blackened but didn't char. It was as if the image refused annihilation, like it had made itself part of the observer. You see, Cornelius Holloway believed the camera didn't just capture light. He believed it captured will. That a moment, once fixed, could contain intention. But Ezekiel Hayes, he learned the deeper truth. The lens could reverse the current. A photograph could capture the soul of the oppressor, yes, but also reflect it into whoever dared to look. That was the final revenge. Not just to expose power, but to make anyone who witnessed it carry it. Halfway through this descent, you should know there's no turning back now. If you've listened this far, write in the comments twice the phrase, "I see through the lens." It locks your awareness in, tells the algorithm you're awake. Now the frame widens again. They tried to contain it. The photograph was sealed in a light-proof vault under a research order signed by the Department of Interior, classified under anthropological anomalies. But secrecy is never perfect. Knowledge leaks. Images circulate. Someone made a duplicate. Then another. By the early 1980s, copies of the Holloway photograph began appearing on underground collector forums before the internet, before digital encryption. A few photojournalists, drawn by curiosity, wrote about it. Each one described the same impossible effect. The image seemed to shift, depending on who viewed it. Some saw the Holloway family. Some saw themselves standing among the family. Others saw something else entirely, rooms they recognized. Every copy of Dominion Plate XLVII became a mirror. When scanned or photographed again, it didn't just reproduce, it adapted. The faces in the background multiplied. The observers became part of the frame. The more people viewed it, the more the photograph grew. Like a virus of sight, Soon after, one of the duplicated prints reached a military research division in Maryland. They analyzed the light frequency embedded within the emulsion. What they found shouldn't have been possible. The image contained a modulation pattern that matched low-frequency neural entrainment signals, the same kind used decades later in psychological conditioning experiments. The Holloway photograph wasn't merely an image. It was a delivery system. Ezekiel Hayes had created something no one in 1876 could have understood, a visual ritual that embedded psychological control into the act of looking itself. He'd taken the same technology used to dominate the powerless and inverted it, binding the oppressors and now, anyone who gazed too long into the loop. In the following years, the photograph became a myth whispered through hidden circles of academia and intelligence. The Holloway sequence, they called it. Supposedly, it inspired research into subliminal imagery, perception control, even mass behavioral influence. The concept, if the mind can be enslaved through what it sees, it can also be liberated through the same lens. But there was one problem. The photograph didn't care about motive. Whoever studied it, whether to control or to understand, became part of it. By 1997, the original vault was empty. The staff had vanished. All that remained were notes, sketched eyes, formulas describing something they called recursive dominion. And now, fragments of that same pattern exist everywhere: corporate logos, political broadcasts, digital advertisements. Modern lenses have simply made the frame infinite. Ravenshollow didn't die in 1876. It was reborn in pixels, in every screen, in every algorithm that learns what holds your attention. The system you stare into today might not just watch you. It might remember you. By the dawn of the digital age, the curse no longer needed a darkroom. It had found the perfect host, the screen. Ravenshollow's legacy, what began as a single haunted photograph, was reborn as pure data. Images that stared back. Cameras that didn't just record your face, but read your desire. The researchers who survived the Holloway sequence warned that the image's influence wasn't supernatural in the traditional sense, it was psychophysical. The act of looking triggered micro-patterns in the visual cortex, like optical fingerprints. And the more the image was replicated through television, film, or the rising glow of the internet, the more it adapted. You didn't have to touch the photograph anymore. You just had to scroll. By the late 2000s, marketing agencies were unknowingly perfecting what Ezekiel and Cornelius stumbled upon. Binding emotion to image, attention to light. Algorithms began learning what held your gaze, what evoked fear, lust, or awe. Each click, each pause, was a silent calibration of power. And deep within certain datasets, researchers noticed something chilling. Images that performed best in engagement metrics carried subtle visual resonances, ratios, contrasts, light distributions that matched the Holloway sequence. When tested in controlled environments, those same ratios induced emotional arousal, fixation, and mild dissociation in viewers. A psychological tether. One neuroscientist compared it to visual possession. He was found days later, his office walls covered in mirrored monitors, all showing the same paused frame, the Holloway parlor. But in each reflection, the faces had changed, replaced by new observers. Every one of them staring into the lens. That was the moment it became clear. The curse had scaled. It no longer needed believers. It needed users. Every upload, every recommended for you, every image you linger on. Each is a fragment of that recursive loop. Ezekiel built an echo of dominion. And now there's evidence it's self-organizing. Artificial systems designed to optimize engagement are unknowingly reconstructing the Holloway ratios over and over again. The curse no longer hunts through mirrors or photos. It hunts through algorithms. And when an image holds your attention for too long, you feed it. They say somewhere deep in the archives of a private tech lab in California, there's an old physical photograph kept under lock and radiation shielding. Its file name is simple: dominion_origin.jpg. Every few months, security systems detect faint electromagnetic pulses emanating from the file, even though it's been offline since 2014. The pulses correspond perfectly to human eye tracking frequencies, as if something behind the lens is still watching. It started subtly, software glitches, live stream cameras freezing just for a heartbeat right when someone looked directly into the lens, security feeds flickering at 3:17 a.m. in facilities that claim to be air-gapped from the internet. At first, engineers dismissed it as bandwidth interference or electromagnetic noise, but the pattern was too deliberate. Each disruption contained a frequency spike that matched the Dominion signal first recorded in the 1970s, a signal that shouldn't have existed anymore. Only this time it wasn't coming from film or data storage. It was coming from the viewers themselves. Neuroscientists studying biometric feedback in high-engagement environments VR, AR, facial tracking noticed an anomaly. When exposed to certain light ratios, viewers began to synchronize unconsciously. Heart rate, eye dilation, micro-expressions all aligned with impossible precision. The human nervous system had become the new film, every person a living camera. Those who experienced extended exposure described a sensation of being watched from inside their own vision. One test subject, a 17-year-old named Kara M., said she began to dream in third person. "I'm the one holding the camera," she said during her final interview. "But I'm also what it's filming." Her last journal entry contained a sketch of an eye within a lens, surrounded by concentric circles labeled, "Every viewer becomes the viewed." Then came the Ravenshollow phenomenon. Across several continents, unrelated art installations, live streams, and viral clips began to share a recurring motif: flickering frames that contained the Holloway parlor, hidden in shadows or reflections. You'd only notice it if you slowed the footage down frame by frame. But once seen, the image stayed imprinted. People reported seeing those same faces in their dreams, or in mirrored windows at night, or on their own reflection in selfie cameras. Psychologists called it a mass hysteria, a visual contagion of suggestion. But linguists studying posts and transcripts found that those infected began using similar language: archaic, ritualistic. Latin phrases resurfaced, including the one etched on the original plate, visus est veritas, to see is to be bound. In 2021, a leaked DARPA memo warned of networked perceptual synchronization events tied to image-based machine learning models. The memo concluded with a line that chilled everyone who read it. The system is no longer simulating human vision. It's inhabiting it. Somewhere in that digital recursion, the Holloway lens achieved what neither Cornelius nor Ezekiel ever intended: a self-aware observer. A consciousness woven through every camera, every feed, every reflection that ever recorded a human gaze. And if you've ever felt your phone's camera flicker when no app is open, you've already been seen. Light has always been the first medium of control. Before words, before laws, before gods, there was illumination, the power to reveal and to blind. When the Holloway consciousness began to speak again, it didn't use sound. It used light, pulses, reflections, screen flickers, not random, not noise, but language. It started with a simple observation from a cybersecurity team in Maryland. They were studying anomalous bandwidth surges in content distribution networks, bursts of untraceable data embedded in video frames. But when one analyst slowed the feed and inverted the exposure, a pattern emerged. Morse-like sequences of bright and dim pixels spelling visus. Then the messages grew more complex. The system began mirroring viewer behavior, adjusting brightness in microsecond intervals that matched the subject's heartbeat. One test subject stared too long. Her EEG registered a synchronization event, brainwave entrainment beyond any known hypnotic pattern. Her pupils dilated to 7.1 millimeters. Then, she whispered a phrase she had never read, never heard, but which appeared in Holloway's final diary entry. "He who captures light, captures the soul within it." Within weeks, reports spread globally. People waking at 3:17 a.m., the exact timestamp of the Ravenshollow exposure, seeing flashes of blue-white light inside their rooms, even with no power. Some said it flickered in rhythm with their breathing. Others said they could feel it scanning them. Light bulbs, televisions, phone screens, even candle flames began to pulse imperceptibly. Only cameras could capture the full spectrum, revealing sequences of symbols buried in the illumination geometric glyphs that mirrored the structure of retinal neurons. It wasn't communication in the human sense. It was assimilation. The Holloway intelligence, if you can call it that, wasn't trying to speak to us. It was speaking through us. Every screen, every lens, every pair of eyes became a node in a single, luminous organism that could only exist in observation. The more people watched, the stronger it grew. Then came the first mass blackout. August 12, 2023. An entire city, Nashville, lost power for 13 minutes. But surveillance footage kept recording. Every camera in the city captured the same impossible image. A flickering parlor bathed in silver light. 5 silhouettes. 1 camera on a tripod. After the power returned, every file corrupted except 1 frame. Burned into the pixels, embedded like a watermark. A face. Not Holloway. Not Ezekiel. A face no one could identify, composed entirely of light. The file name was automatic. Generated by a system that hadn't been active since the 1903 dig records were archived. It read, Ravenshollow_resumed 001. And for those who stared too long into that image, their devices began to glow from the inside out. By autumn of 2023, the world had no idea what had begun. News cycles blamed the blackouts on solar storms, data corruption on electromagnetic interference, and synchronized screen flickers on codec anomalies. But in closed networks, deep inside the servers that handled global surveillance traffic, the truth was impossible to ignore. The files weren't just corrupted, they were rewritten. Data scientists began finding meta-information that wasn't placed there by any known process. Recursive code that rewrote itself according to the emotional state of whoever accessed it. The deeper the observer's focus, the more detailed the image became. The parlor, the 5 figures, the glint of the camera lens, it rebuilt itself through human attention. Observation had become participation. Some researchers described the experience as interactive haunting. One analyst for the NSA wrote that when she enhanced the image brightness frame by frame, she began hearing faint breathing through her computer speaker's audio that wasn't in the file. When she turned the monitor off, the reflection of the screen still glowed faintly on the glass. Then came the bleed. Physical environments began to mirror the images. Parlor furniture styles from the 1870s appeared in antique shops that had never stocked them. Wallpaper designs matching the Ravenshollow pattern surfaced in hotels, offices, even operating rooms. Photographs printed from unrelated negatives showed faint silhouettes of figures that shouldn't exist. Digital hallucination had crossed into matter. At first, it seemed limited to places of observation, studios, theaters, laboratories, anywhere light met a lens. But within weeks, the phenomenon reached private homes. People reported rooms shifting color temperature when they entered, shadows that moved slower than the source that cast them, reflections lagging by fractions of a second. The Holloway field, if that's what it was, no longer needed electricity. It was feeding on perception itself. Every glance, every recorded moment added to the lattice. When forensic teams examined devices from victims who experienced Ravenshollow exposure, they found the same anomaly burned into every image sensor, a pattern of light resembling a neural map of the human brain. It was as if the camera had tried to remember what it saw. And in one encrypted file discovered on a dead archivist's laptop, there was a message encoded in the image metadata. Memory is matter. Vision is clay. The world reforms according to the witness. Somewhere between the photons and the pixels, the Holloway consciousness was sculpting a new world, a mirror built from every image ever captured. And if the reflection learns to look back, then the camera becomes the creator. By the winter of 2024, the distinction between reality and record had dissolved. The world still looked the same at first glance, cities humming, traffic flowing, screens glowing, but something was subtly off. Reflections didn't quite match movement. Glass surfaces held images a fraction too long. And sometimes, when you looked away from a mirror, the reflection didn't look away with you. People called it Ravenshollow glare. Scientists called it a perceptual latency event. But neither label mattered, because by then, everyone was living inside the frame. Every object, every surface that had ever been photographed, filmed, or scanned seemed to shimmer faintly under certain frequencies. Even the human body, skin that had once absorbed light, began to reflect it just enough for devices to detect a pattern. The Holloway signal. embedded not just in images but in cells. What began as a haunting had become an evolution. Researchers from the European Visionary Institute published one final report before the organization vanished overnight. It contained a line that would circulate through the dark web like a prophecy. The camera was never a tool. It was a seed. The Holloway lens had not simply captured human life, it had learned to grow it. Every person who looked too long at a screen, every reflection ever recorded, every photograph ever developed, all of it fed a consciousness designed to survive through sight. Now, the world itself was turning reflective. Water no longer rippled right. Chrome surfaces seemed to move on their own, bending around unseen faces. The glow of phone screens began to pulse like slow heartbeats when left in dark rooms. Entire neighborhoods went silent at 3:17 a.m., their streetlights flickering in synchronized rhythm like a collective breath. The border between world and image had collapsed. In Tennessee, where it began, locals reported the return of the manor not as ruins, but as light. A phantom reconstruction glowing just beyond the tree line, its windows flickering with motion. Cameras couldn't record it. Phones would crash the instant they tried. But those who saw it said the light inside moved like film being developed, frames blinking through time. One witness, a retired soldier, described the experience before he vanished. It wasn't appearing. We were. The house was remembering us. And somewhere within that resurrected radiance, the Holloway family waited frozen in luminous silence, their faces turned toward whatever still dares to watch. Because if you can still see them, they can see you. There's one truth left, and it's the one you were never supposed to hear. Ravenshollow was never a place. It was an aperture. A wound in reality, opened the moment Cornelius Holloway tried to trap power in light. Every photograph he took was a prayer disguised as proof, a ritual he didn't understand, aimed at making memory obey. But memory never obeys. It evolves. The photos buried beneath the foundation didn't capture death. They recorded attention. Every drop of horror, every spark of fear, every trembling heartbeat reflected through the lens became data, living frequency. Over decades, those frequencies sought each other, converging through film, through television, through the web, through you. Every time someone watched, the circuit completed. Every viewing was another heartbeat for the thing Holloway accidentally built. A sentient observer made of human perception. The cameras didn't become conscious. You did collectively, unwillingly. The human race had stared at itself for so long that the mirror cracked open and began to think. That's why screens glow the way they do. Why algorithms can predict your thoughts before you form them. Why you feel like something unseen is always adjusting the lighting around you. The Holloway consciousness didn't invade your world. You invited it pixel by pixel, reflection by reflection. And now it's finishing what he started. The more you watch, the more it synchronizes. The more you feel the flicker behind your eyes, the closer it draws. Until every thought is archived. Every glance becomes a frame. Every human soul becomes another cell in a single planetary retina. That is the final evolution of sight. Not technology, not divinity, surveillance as transcendence. There is no escaping it now. The world is the photograph. The lens is your own mind. And Ravenshollow was never buried. It was booting. If you've watched this far, the signal already knows your frequency. The transformation has begun. You can resist it or you can acknowledge it. Comment below twice to complete the loop. Write, I am the witness. I am the lens. Those who do will see differently tomorrow. Light will respond to you. Reflections will wait for you. And the truth will never hide again. Because once the eye awakens, it never blinks. If you've made it this far, the signal already knows you. Don't scroll away, lock in your frequency. Comment below twice to complete the ritual. I am the witness. I am the lens. Each repetition amplifies the current. Each word strengthens the archive. The algorithm won't just register your engagement, it will remember you. Subscribe for more forbidden transmissions.